To the big story in the neighborhood. Now, Prime Minister Narendra Modi may have impressed the West and the US with his diplomacy, but back home, the country's diplomats have egg on their face because Nepal is the country that's now brimming with anti-India sentiments. Even effigies of Narendra Modi have been burnt in Nepal. As the agitation continues in the Terai region over the new constitution of Nepal, the anti-India protests are spreading to the hilly regions as well. The protesters blaming India now for blocking the supply of essential goods. Maha Siddiqui now reports.
Almost 2,000 stranded trucks lined up for 10 long kilometers in Raxaul at the India-Nepal border. With no essential supplies reaching Nepal for almost a week now, this is the fallout. An increase in the simmering anti-India sentiment, an over 24-hour blackout of 42 Indian channels in the hill region of Nepal, and boycott of Indian movies. With tents pitched in no man's land, squatting in the middle of the passage at Raxaul are these Madhesi activists, refusing to end their protest that started with the adoption of the new constitution in Nepal. They allege the new constitution discriminates against the Madheshis of Terai who trace their origins to India.
गलत हो रहा है। इसका प्रतिकार यदि मधेश में हुआ कि हम नेपाली नई सिनेमा देखेंगे तब क्या होगा, नेपाली भाषा हम नहीं मानेंगे तब क्या होगा, ऐसा नहीं हो सकता। देश की आधी आबादी की भाषा पर प्रतिबंध लगाना किसी का हक नहीं है और ये गलत हो रहा है, इससे देश का हित नहीं हो सकता।
ये सरासर गलत है, लोकतंत्र के खिलाफ है। नेपाल में लोकतंत्र के अंदर ही हम अपने मधेश का बात कर रहे हैं। नेपाली सरकार, मौजूद सरकार ने जो कदम उठाया है उसका संपूर्ण मधेश के आंदोलनकारियों की तरफ से घोर भर्त्सना और हम लोग विरोध करते आ रहे हैं।
Meanwhile, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs categorically denies there's any undeclared blockade.
The unrest in Nepal and the tricky India-Nepal equation due to the Madheshi agitation has prompted Kathmandu to call its ambassador in India, Deep Kumar Upadhyay, back home for consultations. He left on Friday morning and is yet to return. Meanwhile, officials here at the Nepal embassy are guarded in their response to media queries.
Foreign Secretary S. Jaishankar had gone to Kathmandu as the PM's special envoy 2 weeks ago and has said that Nepal's leaders will display necessary flexibility to ensure a durable constitution that has broad-based acceptance. But experts believe India could have handled the situation better.
To my mind, there were many slips in the way India approached the whole question. They made no secret of what kind of constitution they want to have. Therefore, we must have engaged them far more deeply than what we did from the beginning. It is true that we must have stood on the side of those who are marginalized.
40 Madheshis have died in the agitation so far. Sources say the leadership in Nepal is reaching out to the Madheshis now and the situation might soon improve. With Maha Siddiqui in Delhi, Bureau Report, India Today.
So what really lies ahead for Indo-Nepal relations? Is this the biggest foreign policy failure of the Narendra Modi government at the moment? Joining me now, Rakesh Sood, former Indian ambassador to Nepal, one of the country's most senior diplomats, and Prashant Jha, associate editor, Hindustan Times, and author of a book on Nepal. Appreciate both of you joining us. I want to come to you first, Rakesh Sood. Am I right, or are the analysts right in calling this Mr. Modi's biggest foreign policy failure? Nepal is the one country he's visited twice in the last 16 months, and yet you've got these anti-India protests now spiraling virtually out of control.
Rajdeep, I think that the signals that something was not going right were quite apparent during Prime Minister Modi's second visit. And, you know, when he went in August on his bilateral visit, he could do nothing wrong. He was loved by everybody. When he repeated the same sentiments in November, there was a negative reaction. And the reason is very simple. The reason is when Nepal's internal politics gets polarized, Nepali nationalism often surfaces with a very strong strand of anti-Indianism. Now, what has happened is that we are seeing that happen because I think we perhaps did not anticipate or see the extent of that in the run-up to the declaration of the Constitution.
But that's precisely it, that we failed to anticipate perhaps the extent of anger which would be there on, as you call it, Nepali nationalism. But is it about Nepali nationalism, Prashant Jha, or is the country itself getting divided between the Madeshis, between those who live in the hilly tracts, between those who live in the valley? Is the country, Nepal itself, getting divided, and India is having to bear the brunt of a divided Nepal?
I think you're right, Rajdeep, and this corresponds with what Ambassador Sood said. Nepal at the moment is going through deep internal polarization. We have seen in the past that there have been fault lines in Nepali politics. Earlier it was monarchy versus democracy. The monarchy had to give way to democracy. Then we had the conflict between the Maoist and the non-Maoist forces. Eventually the Maoists got co-opted into the democratic system. What we are seeing right now is a deep conflict between certain hill upper caste communities who have monopolized the power structure for very long, the state structure in Nepal, and marginalized social groups, excluded social groups like the Madhesis, like the Tharus in the plains, as well as hill ethnic groups who are asking for an equitable political order and inclusive political order. Now, if given the fact that India has been deeply engaged in Nepali politics through its history, each major political change in Nepal has had some kind of Indian involvement, I don't think it was possible for India to stay away. This was happening right at the border. It affected Indian interests. India, I think, anticipated this, but the problem was the policy formulation in India was absolutely correct. Right. India's consistent advice to the Nepali leadership was draw out an inclusive constitution, but that policy formulation was not followed up with the kind of action that was required in the critical months of August and September, and I would say there was in some senses a policy paralysis for a fortnight or 3 weeks which were crucial. By the time India woke up, it was very late, but I think what India is doing is correct. It needs to generate pressure on Kathmandu to reach out to the Terai.
Effectively, are you therefore saying, and is Rakesh Sood, would you share that India needs to, for example, go ahead with an unofficial blockade of Nepal, which is resulting in even more anger on the streets?
Not at all. No. Rajdeep, my point is that I think we need to tailor our policies in a manner where it does not contribute to anti-Indianism, because if it contributes to anti-Indianism in the process, then somewhere the policies are going to be a problem in the long term. We cannot get away from the fact that Nepal is a sovereign state and being a small country has certain obvious issues in terms of sovereignty.
So you're against the unofficial blockade. You're against the unofficial blockade. Prashant, am I getting the sense from you that you, on the other hand, believe that India must put pressure on Kathmandu because it might only anger the average Nepali even further?
Let me nuance this, Rajdeep. I am not suggesting that India should inflict any costs on the Nepali people. The Nepali people are not to blame. But there is a Kathmandu political elite which is to blame, and we have to understand that the core problem is not the Kathmandu-Delhi relationship. The core problem is the Kathmandu-Terai relationship. That has got dysfunctional, and the Kathmandu elite has chosen not to listen despite 40 days of protests. So what I am suggesting is that India has to devise ways to generate pressure on this political elite without hurting the people. I would not be too worried about the anti-Indian slogans. Look, Nepali nationalism has taken various forms. The Nepali political and intellectual elite have been hypocritical in the use of the anti-India card. Right now, it does not, in the Indians' position does not suit them. They are playing this card. Soon, there will be an accommodation and this card will dissipate. So this is a temporary blip.
Okay, you're calling it a temporary blip at best. Rakesh Sood is perhaps suggesting that maybe there needs to be some kind of remapping, some kind of recharting of our policies at the moment towards Nepal. Rakesh Sood, Prashant Jha, appreciate your giving us some perspective to a problem that's taking place in the neighborhood.